Welcome to the Be the Light Crown Edition podcast. I'm Hannah Frey, your host and pageant queen extraordinaire. Fun fact, while most people are resistant to change, I'm excited by it. So this podcast is designed to allow me to be the light for others. By sharing my experiences across countless topics where I demolished my fears, prejudice, expectations, and rebuilt brick by brick. My hope is I can encourage you to seek knowledge, implement change, and above all, trust in God. So let's get to it. It's time for some you time. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Be the Light Crown Edition podcast. Today, we're going to talk about something I've been alluding to in a few of my episodes and is definitely top of mind for me, and that is nutrition. And while I could go a lot of different directions as usual, we're going to keep this podcast in particular very high level, and hopefully down the road I'll be able to do like a specific nutrition or health or even food mini series where I can kind of dive into each of these topics a little bit more in depth. So just so you know, today very much going to be high level. As always, want to start with the caveat that, as you know, I am not a nutritionist, nor am I a healthcare provider. So this is simply my experiences and things that I have learned and essentially gravitated to ever since I started to prioritize my health and nutrition. So we're going to dive right in. And as always, going to start with a little bit of background and history with my relationship with nutrition and food in general and kind of how that's changed over the years. So very much grew up, as we've talked about in other podcasts, not super stable home environments, right? So not a call out to, my mother or my family in any way, but you definitely are going to prioritize like safety and a home and roof over your head and utilities over organic foods. Okay, that's just the reality of it. And like if in the same situation, I would, prioritize things in the same order. But just the reality of it is we didn't grow up eating a ton of fresh produce, fruits, fresh meats, anything really from the farm. A lot of times too, that was due to just access. Like we spent a lot of time in really small towns. And so there was the one grocery store, that everyone went to. And that is just where you got everything. That's what we had access to. We also had my stepdad is a very picky eater. And so picky and like more than that, right? A lot of like food aversions. And so we didn't eat a lot of like fresh chicken breast even. Like I recall that even into college, I thought that when people were eating chicken, they were getting it out of a can because that's how we ate it. Like we very rarely were getting fresh chicken breast unless we were like frying chicken. So just kind of level setting here and also just to have everyone have that opportunity to like give others grace and understand that everyone's home environment and the foods that they were exposed to and grew up with could just be unimaginably different than what you experienced, okay? And a lot of those things kind of came out in college as I was, cooking for myself and had roommates and what have you. So yeah, also we ate out a lot. I think that especially back when I was growing up, it wasn't necessarily more expensive. So eating out was like a super viable option if we were busy or just didn't have a lot of time. I didn't have a lot of time to prep fresh foods as well. So we ate a lot of processed foods at home, whether that was like meals from like the freezer. And not to say that my mom didn't cook, because she did cook a lot. It was just that we weren't necessarily always offered like fresh fruit because it wasn't always eaten. And again, it goes bad, it's expensive, so you have to be mindful of budget. And, we definitely weren't visiting like farmers markets or anything of that nature. So, and fast food restaurants are affordable. They're quick as it sounds, and that's just the diet and the culture that I had growing up. Another thing to consider is there definitely weren't conversations that I can recall in any capacity, whether it was with my parents, my family, or even in school, to consider intake for sugar, salt, dyes, corn syrup, anything that is such a buzzword and a trigger now. And again, I don't know if that was just culturally because of the small town that we grew up in or, living in a lot of different small towns, or if that was just something that wasn't happening anywhere because it wasn't, the buzzword of the year. But that's something we're looking at now, right? In today's day and age, also with access on social media and online, a lot more access to research and understanding the implications of these additives and, unhealthy things in our food. So I definitely think that has a big part of it. Another little fun fact about growing up, we were very much not conscious of things that might affect our weight or our health because everyone in my family was fairly petite, especially myself. So my mother and I and my family, we loved having dessert almost every night. So candy, desserts was not something on a pedestal. We would make brownies, or cookies or something every night. And I will be completely honest, that is still something that I really struggle with. It is a comfort for me. I love chocolate. I love desserts. I love sweets. And at the end of a long day, after getting both of my kids down, after working a full day, after doing whatever else I'm doing that day, I still partake in a few bites of my candy bar or a few Oreos and milk, right? Or even sometimes baked cookies. And it's hard for me to get away from that. And that is still a habit that I have to this day. So something that's definitely persisted through time. And my college roommates will laugh because I used to completely annihilate a full king or extra large candy bar while in bed while I was studying. That was just, again, my comfort because that was a part of my culture growing up. So I'm hearing my roommates, as soon as they listen to this, they're going to laugh because 100%. There's so many crumbs in the bed. I don't eat candy in bed now. I eat it on the couch. So hopefully that's better. But something else I think about is, very much coming from a lower income family at times, is that there was no food waste. And so when you were offered something for a meal, we didn't waste that. And so there was very much this idea of we have to be cognizant of food waste, that wastes money. And so whether it was something that was good or bad, you finished your plate, right? So we were also aware of that and purchasing and eating foods that were as much low cost as possible. Okay. Also thinking through and again, is this just me or is this everyone? But going through high school and especially college, there weren't very many trainings or even in health class. I know that we all, I'm sure, reviewed the plate, right? It was the My Plate, and there was so much that you would fill on your plate of fruits and vegetables and meats, and that was kind of the extent of it. And then of course the food pyramid was really big, right? With oils at the top and fruits and veggies and meats somewhere in the triangle, and just not super effective, right? We all remember the visual and we had some concept of having a good variety of foods was important, but it didn't go much deeper than that, at least for me personally, in terms of retention. And I have plenty of friends that I grew up with who I know don't know how to read food labels, right? That's not something that was either taught or reinforced into adulthood. So just a lot of concerns from the education standpoint as well. I also was first exposed to the overall diet culture, which I know hits so much younger these days, which is really frustrating for our children. But I wasn't really exposed to that since I was so petite. I was made fun of for being too small, anorexic Annie, and terrible things were said in that regard. But it's probably a little bit easier to be overly skinny than it is to be overweight in high school, especially back in the day. So I recognize that. Everyone's experiences are valid, right? But whenever I started pageantry, there was this element of the swimsuit competition. And so it was at that point that I always thought, oh, well, I'm petite or I'm thin, and so I'm healthy. And that was really for the very first time in those early years of college, working with fitness coaches to understand no, you have no muscle tone. You are not healthy. You don't work out, your diet isn't great, you're what they would call skinny fat, which I know I don't love the term, but essentially just that I was petite in frame and size, but still had quite a bit of fat on my frame. So I could be even trimmer or even thinner than I was, right? As a size 0 or 1 or whatever. So that really persisted. And that's definitely something that shaped the relationship that I had with food in college and moving on, is being aware of how that affects my size, and how even as someone who was petite and thin, I wasn't necessarily happy with how I looked because I wanted to be trim and to be really fit. And fortunately, we're finally at a place where I can meet those goals. So the next thing I will say is I very much didn't drink a lot of water. I still to this day struggle, and I know we talked about water intake, I think in the time management podcast, But even as a 30 something, y'all, I struggle with, I don't crave water, never have. And I have finally, just in the past few years, found a way to flavor my water in a way that is healthy and safe and that inspires, at least 30 ounces of consumption a day. But truly, growing up, no. Like coffee, sodas, teas, all of those sugary drinks, and very minimal water. So, very much not leading to a healthy lifestyle. And I didn't finally start addressing those education gaps because the first stage is awareness, right? Like you have to be aware that you even don't know what you don't know. And I didn't start addressing that until 2019. I mean, after I had Everett and was having all of those health issues that I've discussed in other podcasts. So hopefully that's a little bit of helpful just to understand my background. I know that I definitely want to remove any possible underlying assumptions that because I'm currently active, eat healthy, and thin, that has always been the case, or that I had any level of privilege growing up when it comes to access to healthy, organic, or fresh foods, because that is certainly not the case. And so I want to encourage those who are listening that leading a healthy, in quotes, because I don't love throwing that term around, but making better choices around nutrition and food is something that everyone is capable of doing and has control over. It doesn't have to be 100% perfect. We're not striving for perfection. We're striving for that 1% change and what we can address with the resources and time that we have. So hopefully that's encouraging to you. I want to move into, I actually have 5 like top philosophies that I have followed, and I don't know if I got them from someone or if it's just something I made up, but either way, want to share these with you. And I already alluded to one of them, and that is you don't know what you don't know. And so I want to give everyone, again, just that grace to know that, like, if you have been raised a certain way, or the partner that you have, like, mimics your, nutritional habits, or you just didn't get access to, like, balanced meals or understanding how to read labels or understand what to look for at what stores, it's not your fault, right? Like if you're listening to this podcast, you're already taking such an immense first step to gaining access to education and to start to change your awareness of things. And so like very proud of you. And I think that's amazing. And if you've had those privileges for a while, I hope this will encourage you to share this podcast or share this information with others, because you truly don't know what you don't know until it's like staring you in the face. And you have to also be receptive to change, because if otherwise you might resent or you might push back on anything that is challenging or new. And I know that a big premise of this podcast is inspiring folks to change things when it's hard, and this is one of those topics where it can be very hard. So I want to make it bite-sized and actionable for you, which we'll definitely address later on in the Be the Light and Find the Light sections. Okay, so the second philosophy that I have for you is oftentimes we've put trust where unfortunately our trust shouldn't be. And I don't say this just to be like some crazy conspiracy theorist, or I don't say this to say don't trust like the government and some like high arching theme. That's definitely not what I'm saying. But you should do your research and be aware that money is a big motivator. And one of the biggest industries that has the biggest revenue generation is our healthcare system. It is a for-profit organization, okay? As is all of the food regulatory organizations, right? Like they are for profit. They are making money. Marketers of these big companies, which if you've ever been interested in looking at like food ownership and brand ownership, it is fascinating to see how many brands are owned by like these giant conglomerates. And it's all the money is going to the same person, right? So all of that marketing, it's all driving. They do research on human behavior to see how they can encourage and influence us to buy their products, right? And they are equally trying to find ways to make those products cheaper to manufacture, but still taste good. And in doing so, they're going to cut corners, okay? Keep in mind that you may have simply put your trust in these overseeing, federal organizations or companies that maybe you didn't deserve our trust, because they're misappropriating that trust and they're marketing and they're creating products that just frankly are not for our health. Okay, so all I'm asking you is to keep an open mind there. All right, follow the money, as they say. So, okay, moving into my third philosophy. Our basic intuition and knowledge has been lost over the years. It's actually really interesting because I have a degree in anthropology in addition to biology. And so I did a lot of studies in college about the way that we have, evolved over the years and whatnot, and not to like go too much into the topic, but there is credibility in like, there are basic like intuitions that our body has built in, the way that God has made us, to when we crave a certain thing, a certain type of food, like when you're craving fish or you're craving chocolate, that it means you're deficient in certain minerals. And because of all of the crap and the products and the processed foods and the medications and everything else that we're exposing, all the toxins that we're exposing ourselves to, we have completely numbed and or turned away from the basic intuitions that our body, again, was just built and meant to have, to help us, to help drive decisions around health. And so it is just unfortunate. There's also very much a lost art, right? When you're looking at Native American like medicinal practices, or even just basic homeopathy, like things that have worked for thousands of years, right? As far as we know. And we've just turned to completely synthetic medications. And I'm not saying there's not a time and place for those things, because there certainly are. And it is amazing the ways in which we have overcome and been able to eradicate certain diseases or help people live longer life expectancies. However, it doesn't negate the need to continue to rely on natural remedies and, again, just the herbs and what God put on this earth and gave us to treat certain illnesses. So just some food for thought there. Hopefully there's ways in which, you can do additional research. Just one thing that I know that I did is by doing a full drainage pathway detox, it actually restarted my system, and I found that I began craving and choosing different foods completely different than what I ever had. And I mean, this is a completely true story. I was never a big seafood eater outside of crab legs and shrimp, and ever since doing the cleanse, I was craving salmon, mussels, fish. I mean, my freezer was packed to the brim of seafood, and that was like my food of choice for lunches for weeks on end. And so it's just very interesting ways in which we can tap back into those intuitions. Okay. Next one is, as a whole, America as a nation, right? We are sicker than we have ever been. Nobody that's sane would negate that claim, right? There are more chronic illnesses. Our life expectancy continues to go down. We are sicker than we have ever been. Yet we are so advanced in so many ways. And so I just challenge you to question why that might be. Could it be that the same things in which we are evolving on are making us sick, whether that's frequencies, whether that's these medications that we're treating chronic illnesses with, whether it's the toxins, because we're spraying more pesticides on foods, or the toxins in the water, in the air. There's so much. It's not any one given thing, and I'm definitely not here to say that, but I wholeheartely believe, and this is just my experience and the research that I've done, that it is a overload of toxins from all of these areas, but very much specifically related to food and nutrition, because foods are not made the same way that they were made even 10, 15, 30 years ago, right? We're spraying new things and using new genetic modification strains of things. And there's a lot that goes into it. And I could definitely do a whole separate podcast on it. But I just want to be clear that we should it's common sense. Like, just look at cause and effect. We're sicker than we've ever been. Yet, we have all of these new types of snacks and foods and whatever else. It's just, fast food is bigger and stronger than it ever was. And I feel wholeheartedly that is going to be the beginning of the end. I'm sorry to be morbid, but truly just really frustrating also that we don't have the same regulations and policies in place that many other first world countries do, right? A lot of these dyes, a lot of these additives are completely not allowed in other countries. And so they're manufacturing the same product in two different ways, one which costs them a little bit more but would be much less harmful to our body with the repeated exposure, right, of all foods having these additives and whatnot. I'm not saying that one singular ingestion of like a food dye is going to make you sick. No, certainly not. It's the continued exposure. So just, again, food for thought there. And then the last philosophy I have for you is just be open to always be learning, but don't stress about it. So my biggest thing is, yes, we should always be learning. We should always be thoughtful of challenging our viewpoints on things. And that's not just related to nutrition. That's really just across the board. However, if you allow it to stress you out and overwhelm you, which, full transparency, I've had those moments myself, that's counterproductive because being stressful is going to make you sick in and of itself, right? Or having that stress. So be open to learning, absorb that, or have those moments of research in bite-sized increments that you can handle, and rely on your partner, rely on prayer, but don't allow it to stress you out and overwhelm you to the point where it's no longer beneficial that you're learning and growing in those ways. Okay. All right, so the next section I want to go over here briefly is the get back to the basics, and then we'll move into find the light and be the light. So first thing I have for you is eat whole foods, okay? It's really that simple, as much as you can. And what I mean by that is like single ingredient, like avocados, okay? Or you can buy guacamole. Guacamole, depending on where you buy it from, could have avocados. It could have lemon juice or some sort of added citric acid. It could have processed, onion flavor powder. I mean, I don't know. There are some that are made better, but that's an example, right? So eating guacamole isn't a whole food necessarily, unless it's literally just like avocado mashed up, which could be the case. So whenever possible, make those swaps, which is going to require you to, the next point, number 2, read the labels and learn how to read labels. And I mean, like, yes, be aware of like caloric intake, sure. Serving sizes on there, sure. The actual like percentage of the, if it were me, I wouldn't worry too much about the percent daily value, because that's again coming from the FDA. And personally, I'm not sure that's where I would put the majority of my weight and time and energy in, but I would be aware of the ingredients. And technically, just so that everyone knows, the ingredients should be in order of most commonly found ingredient to least common. So if it's listed first, there is the majority of that substance is that first ingredient, and it should go in order from there, okay? But do some research on how to read labels. That's very much going to be helpful. And try not to fall for, frankly, the brilliant marketing efforts that have been that we were observing. And I'll give you some great example. So first and foremost, natural flavors are anything but. If you didn't know that, consider yourself informed. There is a predetermined list, and I don't have it handy, of what can be deemed a quote unquote natural flavor, but it is not, as it would allude to, natural. Like it's chemicals, okay? If it is the very last ingredient, which it often is, like in my coffee creamer, it's like milk or cream and something else, and then natural flavors. Am I still going to purchase it and consume it? Probably, but you should still be aware that that's not necessarily like something that you want to have in all the foods that you're consuming. The next one, which is my biggest pet peeve, is whenever they market, especially to children, that things have a certain number of servings of fruits and vegetables, yet the food product is so overly processed that they've obviously cooked out and eliminated any nutritional value coming from said vegetable serving. Like they do this on a lot of the Chef Boyardee products, or even like the fruit snacks. Drives me absolutely bonkers. Also, saying that there's like a certain number of like fruit servings and fruit snacks, like, drives me insane. The next thing to be aware of would be like whole wheat, and alluding to like heart health. Sure, but like it's likely also, like, look at the other ingredients, right? Like it also has corn syrup or like an insane amount of processed sugar. Okay, well then that was counterproductive, right? Like they're marketing and they're highlighting maybe the one singular good attribute of that food product, but there's so many other things that are negative about it. So just don't get caught up in the marketing ploy, okay? Even like the stuff that's like for kids, you still got to read the ingredients. And then also, while I am a semi-proponent of organic foods, there are definitely times and places where if it's the same cost, I'll purchase it, because they tend to also align with healthy ingredients. That is not foolproof. So just because something is organic or it says natural or all these other buzzwords, it doesn't necessarily mean that's the case. So just, again, be aware of that. Next, I will say, shop and source locally when possible. We have done, personally, we've done a great job of sourcing local farmers markets. We have friends that like raise chickens and we get eggs from them. There are also some local farms who are doing like subscription boxes. So that's another option. So just be aware of the resources available to you. The next thing I would say, and the last thing here, is if you can make it, and it's something you can fit into your schedule, then opt for that, right? Anytime that you can make something from home, that's just going to be one less exposure, one less toxin, one less processed food that you're going to be consuming. So some great examples would be bread. Also, you're going to save a ton of money because a loaf of bread nowadays is like $4 or $5, and I can make a loaf of bread for 50 cents. Okay, it's so cheap and easy. You can make like if you're doing almond milk or like nut milk, so easy to do in a blender. Making smoothies at home. Obviously coffee at home, but yeah, there's a lot that you can do there to save money and just reduce your exposure to processed foods or things with preservatives, because they're intentionally obviously meant to have a longer shelf life so that they don't go bad. When you make them at home, you're not adding the preservatives, so you do have to eat them faster, but it's just for your family, so generally that's something that you can get done pretty quickly. Okay, so now we're going to move into find the light and be the light. And for reminder, find the light for folks who are just starting out. I don't want this podcast to be overwhelming. I don't want the content to be overwhelming. So I want to be really thoughtful that let's just take this in bite-sized chunks, okay? So first thing, reflect and document your food consumption from last week and just evaluate if it meets your goals or your standards, or if you can just be honest and reflect on that and think, there's ways that I could improve that. I'm aware that like XYZ was processed, or this may not have been the best food choice. And this isn't meant to spread guilt whatsoever. It's just simply a reflection, and start to observe those behaviors that are leading to us making maybe less optimal food and nutrition choices. Okay. Next thing is number 2, write down what is getting in the way of meeting those goals and or like the fresh and whole food consumption. There's probably super valid reasons, right? Like the foods go bad. We tend to travel a lot, or I don't have time to go to the grocery as often, because sometimes this means you have to go to the grocery like more frequently, right? Things aren't lasting as long, or whatever your why is. Just notate them. All we're doing is speaking them into existence so we can simply reflect on them. And then lastly, make a goal of one food staple or item, either per week or per month, depending on what the item is, to research or find a better, healthier alternative for. Some are going to be harder than others, right? Like we really struggled to find a good store-bought, gluten-free, dairy-free bread, which is why we ended up just opting to make bread at home every weekend. And I had to invest in a bread maker, right, to like remove that obstacle, because it was just a lot. It was like $50. So by the way, like totally worth it. It's like a cheap, crappy bread maker, and it does amazing. But just make a goal and don't bite off more than you can chew. We unfortunately had to do this in a giant chunk. We immediately started an elimination diet of dairy and gluten and egg, and processed sugar. It was the hardest thing I have ever had to do. And I recognize if you've had to do that, like definitely praying for you, or if you're in the thick of that, it is so hard. And so I recognize that doing it before you have to, by the way, would be ideal. So you can do it in slow chunks, because I had to pretty much throw away all the food in our entire house, and that was not fun. Okay. All right. Moving into Be the Light. So first, I have an app that I recommend. There are plenty of others on the market, but use an app similar to Yuka to audit your current pantry. So that's something that I have done, and I also use this app anytime I'm grocery shopping. So the purpose of the Yuka app is to identify if there are additives in there that are considered hazardous, right? Like super harmful, or if they're just like not ideal, then you can probably live with that. We still have to have a lot of like shelf stable foods and snacks in our home, so I try to find a good happy medium there. It can also tell you if something has gluten or lactose, which is really helpful if you have kids or folks in your home who have certain food allergies, and it's going to give you a score out of 100 in terms of their predetermined health measures. I wouldn't put too much weight into like the number per se, but it does give you an idea of a range of like, oh, the sodium content's really high or the sugar content's really high. But if it's natural sugar, it's no added sugar, well, that's obviously better than added sugar. So you take the numbers and the information with a grain of salt, but at least it gives you the information in this app. So again, that's Yuka, Yuka. All right, the next thing is list your biggest buckets of food consumption, like whether it's meats or veggies or what have you, and find a way to make those healthier or cleaner. So for example, meat from the grocery, we eat a ton of meat. We eat meat with almost every meal, and I was struggling with finding a good alternative for getting that meat from the grocery because of cost, because of access. We've explored options at the farmer's market, and we've actually landed on there's a local farm who will ship to us in like a meat subscription box, but they're located here in Mississippi, not far, I think in Como, Mississippi, and it's all straight from the farm, right? So it's not going to have those additives. It's grass-fed beef, all this amazing stuff. So that's a big undertaking. We're clearing out our freezer to then have space for this, and it is a little bit of an added cost, but that's kind of the biggest bucket for us, so we address that first. All right, and then lastly, just a call out to spread the message of health through food. Some ways in which that you can do this: bring those healthy alternative snacks to your school events, to your t-ball games, right? To the birthday parties, to the cookouts. And you're just having casual conversations of, wow, like, hey, I don't know if I know you shop at Aldi. I don't know if you noticed like the fruit strips. These are so great. There's no added sugar, no other additives in here. These are so great for like a quick snack. And it doesn't have to come off in a judgmental or, any sort of negative way, but we are, just having these conversations because that's how we spread information about health. That's how I got information from others. And we do it in a loving way in which that promotes better nutrition and health for those that we care about, right? So that's my call out to you. I hope this episode was helpful. I know it's kind of high level, but I look forward to in the future doing more of a deep dive on overall health and food nutrition. But for now, we're going to close in prayer and move on to the next episode. Dear God, thank you as always for the opportunity to just speak on the importance of nutrition and nourishing these bodies that you gave us, God, and using the fruits and the vegetables and everything that grows naturally on this earth to nourish our bodies, Lord, and make smarter decisions on what we are putting in our bodies. Our body is our temple, and we definitely want to honor it and protect it as we are made in your likeness. And I just appreciate the opportunity to share my message with others, to share my journey, and also just ask you to look over and really pray for those individuals who are walking in a similar footsteps and are walking through a similar phase of life where they're looking for guidance on creating better food choices and being healthier for not only themselves but for their family and for long-term health. So I ask you to keep your mind and heart on those individuals, and thank you again for this opportunity. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.